What if the story we were told about how Kody Brown met Robyn was never the full truth? And what if their connection actually started years earlier, when Robyn was still just a kid in the same church community? Stay with me, because the deeper we dig into this timeline, the more shocking it gets. And if you love uncovering hidden reality TV secrets, make sure you hit subscribe right now, because this channel exposes the stories nobody else is talking about. Sometimes a story that has been repeated for years begins to sound completely normal to the audience, but the moment someone slows down and looks closely at the details, the entire timeline begins to feel strange. And that is exactly what has been happening with the long-discussed story of how Kody Brown and Robyn Brown supposedly met. Because for a very long time, the public version has been simple and clean. They met as adults sometime around the late 2000s. Sparks flew, and eventually Robyn entered the Brown family as the fourth wife, changing the entire dynamic of a household that was already known for its complicated structure. But the more people analyze the background of the community where all of this happened, the more that simple explanation begins to unravel. Because the Apostolic United Brethren, often referred to as the AUB, is not an enormous religious organization where thousands of unrelated strangers live disconnected lives. Instead, it is historically a relatively small, tight-knit religious community where families know each other through church gatherings, youth programs, weddings, social events, and extended family relationships. And when a group functions in that way, the chances of members remaining complete strangers for decades becomes incredibly small, especially when those members are connected through multiple social layers, such as church leadership, youth events, and family friendships that stretch back years or even generations. And that is where the questions start to grow, because during the same years when Robyn Brown was growing up within that broader religious culture, the Brown family was deeply involved in church life, particularly in youth activities where adults served as leaders, organizers, and mentors to the younger members of the community. And records from former members, as well as old yearbooks from youth programs, suggest that Kody Brown and Christine Brown were actively involved in leadership roles, helping guide youth events, dances, and gatherings, while Mary Brown helped coordinate camps and other activities for teenagers in the group, which meant they were not distant observers. They were central participants, helping organize events where young members of the community came together to socialize, worship, and learn the expectations of their faith. And this is important because Robyn herself spent much of her youth within that same network of communities, including time in places like Pinedale, Montana, and areas near Cedar City and St. George, Utah, which were not isolated locations, but rather part of the same interconnected AUB environment, where members traveled between branches for gatherings, celebrations, and youth activities. And according to people who grew up in that system, youth events were a major part of community life because teenagers from different regions would travel, sometimes long distances, to attend dances, retreats, and church-organized camps, where dozens or even hundreds of young people gathered in one place. And these gatherings were not limited to teenagers alone, because adults often attended as supervisors, leaders, or organizers, ensuring the events followed church guidelines while also participating in the social environment that surrounded those gatherings. And people who remember those years describe buses full of teenagers traveling across state lines, heading toward a church event where everyone already shares similar beliefs, family connections, and cultural expectations. It becomes easier to understand how familiar everyone eventually became with one another, even if they did not personally speak at every event. And this is where the story becomes far more intriguing, because several former members have mentioned that photographs from those youth gatherings still exist, showing different families attending the same events during the same years. And some of those photographs reportedly include individuals who later became widely known through the reality television series that introduced the Brown family to millions of viewers. And when people hear about those photographs, it naturally raises curiosity about how early certain connections might have existed. because even seeing someone repeatedly at dances, camps, or church celebrations can create a form of recognition that lingers for years, even if the individuals involved did not officially begin a relationship until much later in life. And in communities where marriage and family are central teachings, those early impressions can quietly shape how people view one another as they grow older, especially when the culture itself encourages members to eventually marry within the same religious network and build families that continue the traditions of the faith. And former insiders have often explained that youth dances were particularly significant because they were one of the few structured environments where young men and young women could interact socially within the guidelines of the faith. The church and those dances were not casual modern tardies, but carefully supervised gatherings where music played, conversations happened, and young members slowly became familiar with the people who might one day become potential partners within the faith. And when observers today hear stories about how often these events occurred and how many families attended them, they begin to realize that the community was far smaller than outsiders might imagine, which makes the idea of complete unfamiliarity between certain families more difficult to believe. And this realization has fueled years of discussion among viewers who wonder whether the official timeline presented publicly might simply represent the moment when a romantic relationship began, rather than the first time two individuals ever saw or recognized each other within their shared religious world. Because there is a meaningful difference between meeting someone for the first time and already being aware of them through years of overlapping social circles. And that difference becomes even more interesting when people recall comments made in past conversations that hinted at connections stretching back further than the public narrative suggests. Because one remark in particular once referenced the beginning of a family timeline in a way that mentioned a much younger age for someone who would not become part of the Brown household until many years later. And for listeners, that single comment created a moment of pause, not because it confirmed anything specific, but because it suggested that memories of the early years inside that community might be far more interconnected than the simplified story that eventually reached television audiences. And when you imagine how many events took place over the span of a decade, youth dances, retreats, camps, church meetings, and weddings where entire congregations gathered together, it becomes easy to see how familiar faces would appear again and again, forming a network of recognition that quietly connected families long before their stories ever became public. And this is the part of the narrative that continues to fascinate people because it hints at a deeper history hidden behind the polished explanations that were later shared on camera. And when former members talk about their memories, they often describe a world where everyone seemed only a few introductions away from everyone else, where cousins married into other families, and where church. As people continued examining the deeper background of this story, another layer of curiosity slowly started to unfold. Because when former members of the same religious culture began sharing memories about how youth gatherings actually worked, it painted a much clearer picture of the environment where many of these future relationships quietly developed long before cameras were ever involved. And according to individuals who spent their teenage years inside that community, youth programs were not occasional small meetings, but a central part of social life, where young members regularly traveled across different states to attend events organized by church leaders and volunteers. And those events included large dances, camps, retreats, and weekend gatherings where teenagers from places like Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and nearby areas all came together in one location, sometimes staying for days while participating in activities, lessons, and social time where people mingled in large groups, often surrounded by adult leaders who knew the families involved and kept a watchful eye on the environment. And when people recall those experiences decades later, they often remember how small the social circle truly felt, because the same names and families appeared at almost every event, which naturally created a sense that everyone in the community was only a few connections away from everyone else. And this is where the mystery surrounding the early timeline of certain relationships becomes even more interesting. Because when individuals who were present during those years mentioned old photo albums or memories of trips, they sometimes recall seeing familiar figures standing in the background of pictures from dances, camps, or gatherings long before those individuals became widely known through television. And while these memories do not necessarily prove exactly when someone first spoke to another person, they do highlight how likely it was that many members of the community were at least aware of each other years before the official narrative suggests. And that awareness alone can change the way people interpret the story, because recognizing someone from earlier events is very different from meeting them as a complete stranger for the first time. And when fans combine that possibility with comments that have surfaced over the years about how young members of the community were taught about future marriage life and family life, the entire discussion begins to take on a deeper cultural context, because former participants have openly explained that within that environment, girls and boys were often raised with the expectation that marriage within the faith was not just encouraged, but spiritually important. And that idea was introduced early through church teachings, youth discussions, and family conversations, which meant that even during teenage years, many young members were already thinking about their future roles as husbands, wives, or parents inside the same religious system. And because plural marriage was part of that belief structure, it also shaped how relationships were viewed within the community, particularly when it came to men who were already known or respected within the church, because those individuals sometimes carried a certain level of recognition among younger members simply due to their involvement in leadership roles or active participation in church life. And this does not automatically mean that any inappropriate behavior occurred, but it does explain why younger members might have been familiar with older participants long before adulthood, simply because they saw them repeatedly at the same events, gatherings, and church activities. And when modern viewers hear these descriptions, it often creates a feeling of discomfort, not necessarily because of any single confirmed event, but because the cultural expectations surrounding youth social life within that community were very different from what many people experience in mainstream society today. And that contrast is part of what keeps the conversation alive, because people naturally try to understand how those early environments shaped the decisions, relationships, and life paths that followed years later. And in the case of the Brown family story, the ongoing curiosity revolves around whether certain introductions or recognitions might have happened quietly during those early youth gatherings, long before the public narrative begins. And even though the exact details may never be fully confirmed, the idea itself continues to fascinate viewers because it suggests that the roots of the story may stretch much further back into the past than anyone initially realized. And as more former members share their memories of bus trips, dances, church events, and youth camps, the picture that emerges is one of a tightly connected world where families socialized frequently, where teenagers grew up seeing the same people again and again, and where the line between strangers, acquaintances, and future partners could slowly blur over time without anyone fully realizing the significance of those early encounters until many years later, when their lives eventually intersected in a way that would later capture the attention of millions of viewers around the world. And that possibility that the story may have begun quietly in the background of those early community gatherings continues to spark discussion among fans who wonder how many unseen moments from the past may still remain hidden behind the official version of events, waiting to be understood more clearly someday. So if this timeline really goes deeper than we were told, the biggest question is, what else has been left out of the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.